A little while back, I made a post about loan assumptions because every once in a while on social media you see a clever hack, some way maybe whether it's to save money on taxes or to have a better option for a mortgage. And in this case, I am talking about loan assumptions. And although I think the people who post these have good intentions, I think the advice itself is not good and actually kind of counterproductive to a home buyer's goal of achieving home ownership. So to recap, what I talked about in that video about loan assumptions is that it's essentially like finding a needle in a haystack. So loans can be assumed, but typically they're government loans, meaning FHA, VA, in some cases, rarely, USDA, which are a really rare type of loan that we see only in rural areas. So basically we're talking about FHA and VA loans. A majority of the loans are conventional loans, which are not assumable. So already you're narrowing down a huge group of homes that could potentially have assumable loans. And when it comes to VA loans, that gets even narrower because one, you have to be a veteran in order to assume a VA loan, but then there are other complications that arise with if a veteran is willing to let his loan be assumed, does it somehow curtail his ability or her ability to purchase a home in the future because they've relinquished some of their entitlement? Okay, I don't want to get too deep into the weeds on that, but the point is, assuming a VA loan is very, very rare, which then leads us to the next biggest group, which would be FHA loans. And I mention this because I was at an open house this past weekend and I wanted to share with you this real life scenario. So the open house I was at is basically on the market for $800,000. And it just so happens that the home is the loan on the house is a FHA loan, and it's at a rate of 3.75%. So who wouldn't want a rate of 3.75% in the current market? Well, to recap, what happens when a loan gets assumed is that the buyer basically has to come up with a down payment that is the difference between whatever the existing loan balance is and the purchase price. So in this case, the loan balance was about $200,000, excuse me, about $600,000, and the purchase price was about $800,000. So in order for a potential buyer to assume this loan, they're going to have to come up with about a $200,000 down payment. And that's a pretty large down payment for a first-time home buyer, or really anyone, but especially in this price segment, that's a large down payment. But if they could, then they'd get that 3.75% rate and the payment of $3,108, which is the principal and interest payment plus the mortgage insurance. So again, sounds like a great thing to go for. But when you compare that to what would the minimum down payment required be on this $800,000 home if you were to do a new FHA loan? Because FHA loans allow as little as a 3.5% down payment, which in this case would only be $28,000. And for a lot of the first-time home buyers that I talk to, this is kind of more in the range, $28,000 or maybe twice that they have available for a down payment, but not a $200,000 down payment. So already in most cases, most buyers are going to be disqualified from assuming the loan because they don't have enough down payment to make that work. And so I'm showing this one comparison here of a 3.5% loan with an FHA, 3.5% down payment with an FHA loan. This is actually at a rate, current rates FHA 6.125%, okay? And you'd have a principal and interest payment of $52.52. So that payment, basically $2,000 more. Understandable why someone would want to have a payment that is $2,000 less with a 3.75% rate. But again, that means coming up with a much larger down payment. And it might be easier to afford the $52.52 monthly payment than it is to come up with the additional $172,000. Now you compare that to a conventional loan. So in most cases, conventional loan minimum down payment is 5%. $40,000. Again, that is well within the range of a lot of the first-time home buyers that I see that have funds available for a down payment. In which case the rate is higher. So the rates are higher typically on conventional loans than they are in FHA, 6.999, and then the payment with the principal and interest and the mortgage insurance would be about $52.39. So very comparable, these two payments. And so again, if someone wants to do that, that is an option that would save them a lot of money at closing. But let's come back to this scenario here where somebody, let's just say they do actually have the ability to come up with a $200,000 down payment. Well, if they're doing that, that's a 25% down payment. So in that case, they may as well just look at a conventional loan. Put $200,000 down on a conventional loan. Now the rate is 6.875%. Okay, so it's still a higher interest rate, and the payment definitely higher at 39.42. That's the a principal and interest payment, and now no mortgage insurance, right? Because there's so much equity, mortgage insurance is not required. So the payment is higher, the interest rate's higher than what it would be, but when you start looking at the breakdown of that higher interest rate, which just means more interest that the buyer gets to deduct. So they're going to have a larger tax write-off. Additionally, when rates eventually come down, they will refinance that rate from 6.875% down into the mid sixes or low sixes, or in my opinion, sometime within the next 12 to 18 months, probably the mid 5% range. So they will see that rate and that payment come down. But on this loan here, these borrowers, although they have all this equity, they're going to be stuck with paying mortgage insurance for the life of the loan. Because with FHA loans that have less than 10% down, you're paying mortgage insurance for the entire time you have the loan, the whole 30 years, regardless of how much equity there is. Okay, so this is why it's really not practical to assume a mortgage. And because the other real kicker here is that you have to keep in mind, again, with homes in this price range, $800,000 in Southern California, this is a very competitive price point for first-time home buyers. So a lot of homes are getting multiple offers, say 2, 3, 4 offers, okay? And if they're like my borrowers who've been totally pre-approved, they're able to close in 14 days, like we just closed one last week in 14 days. If someone's going to go through the assumption process, they have to go through the loan approval process assumption with the existing lender, which is going to be probably at least 30 days. So you got to think about this realistically. Is a seller and a listing agent, when they're looking at 2 or 3 or 4 offers that can close in 15 to 21 days, or maybe some that are all cash, are they going to choose an offer that basically still has to be approved and is probably going to take 30 to 45 days to see if they even get approved for the assumption? Or are they going to choose one of the other offers that they have in hand? So it's the old bird in hand worth 2 in the bush. So this is why I feel like talking about promoting a loan assumption is kind of a lost leader and a sort of a disservice to buyers, because it's giving a false hope that somehow you're going to lock into this low interest rate that was only available 3 years ago. It's just not going to happen. Now, in the one case that I believe this could happen, would happen, is if we were to turn back the clocks to 2010 when we were in the middle of a housing crash and you had tons of property languishing on the market for several months. Then yes, if someone were to approach a seller with an offer to assume their loan, that is an offer that would probably get looked at very seriously and may very well get accepted. But in the current market, it's just not realistic. So buyers are much better off to just go the route of getting a full pre-approval, being able to position to close themselves quickly, and hopefully get their offer accepted over the others. Because the important thing is, in this climate, that although home inventories have started to come up, and that's great to see, we still have a relative lack of inventory. And so the more buyers kind of defer their dreams of home ownership by chasing rainbows and unicorns, the more they defer their home ownership and their ability to build equity in the home, write off interest. So that's what I wanted to point out. Anyone who's considering a loan assumption, maybe think twice about that. Of course, love to hear from you, prepare any scenarios for you about what would be the best strategy for you. So thanks for watching.